Welcome to part two of Aligning Culture with Vision in the ongoing review of dynamic leadership. At its core, dynamic leadership is about aligning people, culture, and vision, not through force, but through clarity, adaptability, and understanding. Every leader faces resistance and friction at some point. How we handle these moments determines whether we create a thriving, engaged environment or allow dysfunction to take root. People don't see the world as it is, they see it through their own internal maps. These maps shape how they interpret challenges, respond to direction, and engage with others. The greater the gap between maps, the more likely misalignment becomes. And when it comes to conflict, leaders must be the ones to adjust. Now, this isn't about lowering standards, it's about communicating in a way that gets through rather than expecting others to do the work to understand us. Think of it as an evolved version of the golden rule, treating people how they need to be treated to be effective, not just how we prefer to be treated. I'm talking about intrinsic motivation, and it's essential for consistent high performance. It's also important when it comes to keeping people engaged while navigating development plans. At the heart of intrinsic motivation is self-determination theory, which tells us that people need three things to stay engaged: autonomy, a sense of control; competence, the belief that they are capable, and of course that breeds more confidence; and relatedness, feeling valued and connected. When someone is being difficult, chances are one of these needs is being threatened. Defensiveness, loss of autonomy, disengagement, a hit to competence, resistance, a breakdown in relatedness. Rather than reacting to the behavior, which, if difficult, is likely more of a reaction than a response, leaders must look deeper, get curious about what's driving that reaction. First, I'll cover bridging communication gaps using the four styles framework. We all have natural communication styles, and the four styles model includes relator, socializer, director, and thinker. The essence is that conflict often arises when our styles are in direct opposition. When this happens, the burden of adaptation is on the leader. It's not about changing who we are, but ensuring our message lands in a way that makes sense to the other person. The same way that a player on a team uses requisite variety to adapt to new strategies from an opposing team, leaders have to adapt to their organization and the dynamics in it. Even small differences, like the Myers-Briggs type indicator, intuitive, which is N, versus sensing, which is S. These distinctions, they can create disconnects. One person sees big picture patterns, that's the N. The other needs concrete details, the S. If we don't account for these gaps, we end up talking past each other. Now, I'll finish with a look at a topic that is sometimes called coping with difficult people. Is it really difficult people, or is it difficult reactions? Most of the time, we aren't dealing with difficult people. We're dealing with people who are reacting to conditions and triggers in their environment, especially when they're already compromised from stress, fatigue, uncertainty. Small things can trigger behaviors that we perceive as difficult. Instead of getting pulled into reacting to the reaction, leaders need strategies to bring the conversation back on track. By recognizing these difficult personality types and applying targeted responses, leaders and professionals can prevent disruptive behaviors from taking control. Instead of reacting emotionally, they can steer interactions toward constructive dialogue, strengthening their influence and fostering a healthier workplace culture. That's a good example of why it's called dynamic leadership. The landscape is constantly changing, and we have to be able to navigate whatever is thrown our way. Today, I'll share practical tools that'll help you use direct, neutral language to nudge people into their conscious mind. Trace how someone arrived at a conclusion rather than reacting to the conclusion itself. and respond in ways that reinforce autonomy, competence, and relatedness so conflicts de escalate instead of escalating. This isn't about managing people's emotions or tolerating dysfunction. It's about addressing friction points before they turn into real problems. Because small issues don't stay small. Left unchecked, they create disengagement, resentment, and even toxicity. Think of this as leadership maintenance, like weeding a garden before it gets overgrown. So let's dive into it. The first thing I want to do is talk about the four styles. The four styles is an easy framework to follow, and one that it makes it easy to have conversations about it, and we can it's relatable. It's something that even in this session you'll be able to experience how it works. Some of you may have heard about it before. Sometimes I first saw it in sales, but it works very well for leadership, especially in dynamic leadership, because we're constantly managing perceptions. And the more VUCA the environment, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, the more things are changing. And the more things change, the more opportunities there are for disconnects or misunderstandings. Now, with the four styles, and this was from Alessandra and Cathcart originally when I saw it, but it's been redone and revised, and you may have seen it in different formats. Sometimes I've seen the labels different as well. Now, what I'd like you to do is think about a person in your organization to make this real, because it's not about theory, it's about application. And while I'll cover the scope, you may want to take a screenshot of the finished product so that you have it. And rather than try to learn it and say, this is what I'm going to do when that happens, it's more about applying it real time and experiencing it. So if you could think about somebody in your organization that's important, you want to make sure that there's a good relationship, but there's more friction than you would like to see in that particular relationship. And you've tried some things, and while you guys or gals get along, it's still some friction that's there. So think about somebody like that. And it's important that we do it this way that I'm going to show you, and you'll see why in a moment. But we're going to talk about four styles, but rather than starting with the four styles, I'm going to talk about how you arrive at them. Otherwise, people tend to look at the four style attributes and then back into what this person is, when it's very misleading. For example, if you know introverts who do public speaking or who are in sales, it's very easy to think that they're extroverts. But when you get down to it, it turns out they're introverts. A better way to tell an introvert or extrovert is how do they recharge. Extroverts recharge by being around other people. Introverts recharge by being alone. Now, that's a broad generalization, but it's a lot better than looking at them, especially in the sense if you saw an introvert on stage speaking, it would be very, as I said, very easy to think that they're an extrovert. So the same way here, we don't want to start with the styles because you have things like confirmation bias and it backs you into the wrong perspective. So the first thing we want to do is decide, is the person direct or are they indirect? And so a person might be somewhere if this is a midpoint, they might be somewhere over here, just for sake of argument. And that's what you want to do. You want to first decide, are they direct? And if this is 0, are they +1, +2, +3, +4 on the direct side? Or are they -1, -2, -3, -4 on the indirect side? Plot that first. And the way to determine are they direct or indirect, direct people tend to be assertive, they're fast-paced, they're going to make declarative statements. You kind of get the pictures. But basically, it's a person who knows, who sounds like they know what they want, and then they're being assertive about that. Whereas an indirect person may beat around the bush, they may couch the request, they may use questions instead of making statements when a statement would be better. You get the picture. And then the other thing we want to do is look at the other axis, the vertical axis. And we're now going to look at, is this person task oriented or are they people oriented? And things change. So I would say look at this in the workplace, because if you're looking at it in personal, it might change. If you're looking at it around their family, it might change. But stick to one environment, the one that you're interacting with them in, and then do this sequence first. Oftentimes when we're having this conversation, people say, it depends, I'm in the middle. They want to say that they're in the middle, but we all have a default mode and we all have an under stress mode. And what you want to do is understand where they go to when they're starting to go into stress, because if a person becomes difficult to interact with, they're under stress, and that's more of their style that you want to be looking at. Otherwise, looking at 0 doesn't take you anywhere. But if you look at where they go under stress, then that gives you something to work with. And then let's say that they are in the middle here on the way up to task. So this person would be a director. Now, if they were over here, if it's task oriented and it's indirect, they would be a thinker. If they're over here, direct and people oriented, they would be a socializer. And if they're over here, the indirect and people oriented, they would be a relator. And I think these labels are fairly descriptive if you think about it. So you have your analyticals over here. You have the people who would gravitate towards doing more data gathering. They're going to be more precise with their language. They're looking at facts and figures as opposed to, pulling something off off the top of their head. And then the director, very obviously, is going to be decisive. That's the direct part. They're also results oriented. They tend to be competitive. So let's start listing some of these. Analytical, detail oriented, systematic, and precise. Now this, you can see why, an engineer would fit in here, an accountant. And this is why you don't want to look at the style first and then figure the other parts out, because it will influence you, because a person could be a socializer, but in their accounting role, they're going to exhibit more of those traits. And then on the director, we have decisive, we also have results driven, competitive, independent. You may also think of this person as being a pragmatist. Obviously, somebody running an organization is going to exhibit some of those traits, but it doesn't mean that person is a director. If you look at, there are people who run organizations, presidents, et cetera, and they might be over here. They might be a thinker. That's going to be fairly common because of the analytical piece of it. But when they're out in front managing or leading the organization, they're going to probably look more like a director. The socializer is going to be more like expressive. You're going to always know where they stand. Enthusiastic. Persuasive. Spontaneous. Energetic. And I'm putting these words down here to give you a picture, give you a sense, but you can see this is going to start to sound like a salesperson. And then we have the relator, is empathetic, supportive, loyal, patient, and a good picture to think of is like a den mother, organizing things, team builder, focusing on the team. Any of these could be a team builder, obviously, but this one is going to be looking for how do we pull everybody together? Let's all get along. Let's find something that everybody likes doing. So you get the idea. So the purpose of this is not for you to understand what these styles are. The purpose of me providing this in the framework of dynamic leadership is to, one, show that people do have preferences. And you can go your entire life without knowing this and do just fine. But what we want to do when it comes to leading is understand people's preferences. Now, the director has more in common with the thinker and the socializer than they do with the relator. And you can see where the relator is going to value patience, the director may be a little bit impatient, and that's where it gets hard. Whereas the director is going to gravitate towards task, the relator is gravitating towards people. So when you have this catty corner going on, that's where you're going to start getting natural conflict. Now, we can't expect the employees to adjust. The leaders have to be the ones who adjust and say, I'm going to be a little slower when I'm interacting, for socializer, when I'm interacting with a thinker. I'm going to go a little bit slower. I'm going to have my facts and figures, and I'm going to tone down some of my enthusiasm. And vice versa with the thinker, they may need to speed up and not be so, I'm going to use the word anal, but I shouldn't say it that way, but that's what people might call somebody who goes deep down that thinker path. They start getting so detailed. You can see how the salespeople kind of bounce out of it. And then the same with the director and the relator, which I already talked about. So this is important to understand that catty corner is where the difficulty is. So I asked you to think about a person who's important in your organization and might be difficult for you to interact with. Think about where you are, but don't say which one you fit in. Are you direct or indirect? And are you task or people oriented? Now, once you have that, now answer the same questions about them. Are they more direct or indirect? And are they more task or people? And now look at the labels here and see if that applies. And so this is just one dimension. We're going to look at another framework in a moment. And just look at this to decide, is there tension happening because of this catty corner? And even though a director has the direct piece in common, the director is going to be less patient than the thinker. They could have friction because of that. And the director wants to go after it. Imagine like a sales manager wanting to get after it, and they're interacting with the CFO. You can see where there's going to be some natural tension, even though they have a similarity. Same when the director is working with the socializer, the sales team. If that director is a sales manager, they're working with the sales team. You can see where the director is going to be more obviously decisive and assertive about how things are and getting down to business, whereas the salespeople may want to have a little bit of fun. They may want to cut up a little bit. They don't want to go into so much detail. They just want to get out on the floor. They're like interactors. Let's go interact. Let's make something happen. Whereas the director is going to make sure that they go through the steps to get the results. Hopefully that makes sense. And what I'm doing here is, instead of starting with how to cope with difficult people, what we want to do is let's reduce the pool of what's thought of as difficult people by removing other sources of friction. Now, there's other styles you can look at, the DISC and Myers-Briggs, and both of those are very valuable. But I like this one in the context of coping with difficult people, because it allows you to get some context around what could be at play, rather than assuming that there's something wrong with that other person, or treating them like you're waiting for them to change. The thing is, people are not going to change. And all my work, we talk about behavior change and replacing habits. So yes, we can change, but we have that purpose that we're leaning into. There's something bigger than us. So we have leverage. People are not going to change for us. They're going to change when they're ready to change. And so waiting for them to change or trying to change them is just a non-starter. Now, another dimension I'd like to look at when we start talking about interactions is the Myers-Briggs type indicator, MBTI. And in the MBTI, there's 4 different types. There's 4 different subtypes. There's the extrovert and the introvert. So it's pretty straightforward. Now, you can look at it from the standpoint of extroverts are more outgoing, but as I said, to really determine if a person's an extrovert, you're better off looking at how they recharge. Again, I mean, this is not a deep psychological dive, but it's a quicker way to say that person recharges by being alone. That person recharges, they always want to go out, they want to go to the next happy hour, whereas the introvert's like, man, I'm glad that thing got canceled. And then the other one is and I'll draw this in a different color, the N and the S. So the N is the intuitor, the S is the sensor. I'll come back to those. And then we have the thinker and the feeler. And again, it's descriptive. The thinker is going to be more analytical. The feeler is going to think about the people. So you can kind of see the thinker and the relator from the other one, but it goes deeper than that. And then we have the judger and the perceiver. And you can go online and look for MBTI, abbreviated version, or MBTI Lite. It changes who's offering it. This is a course. This is an engagement that you pay for, and you get a facilitator that goes through it with you, with the team. I like doing this. As I do recommend that owners, team leaders, you go through this with your leadership team. It opens some eyes, and it also helps you decide where to assign projects. It helps you decide who your next person should be, because you don't want all of the same types. You want a good mix, and that's one of the big benefits. But what I want to talk about is the N. The N likes the big picture. First, it doesn't mean they can't look at the detail. And the S likes the details first. They like the concrete. The N likes the abstract, conceptual. The reason I'm calling these 2 out is because the N and the S, and you'll hear this if you go through the facilitated sessions with Myers-Briggs. I used to take all my teams through it. I would go through it with my team leaders, I should say. Anytime I got a new team, which was about every 2 years, I would go through the Myers-Briggs with my team leads or my direct reports. And so I've been through it multiple times. And every time we went through it, this is one of the things that they bring out, but they facilitate an exercise. And in that exercise, they put all the N's together and all the S's together. And it's very, very clear how we approach things differently. The N's are eager to adjust things, make adjustments. And the S's are more stay the course. It's almost as though the N's want to, let's create a new project. Let's add something different. Let's put this in there. Let's change that. And the S's are, let's communicate it again. Let's tell them, let's write it down. Let's make sure they know how to do it. And it's all about maintaining. And this was about changing. And that's why you want both. If I was going to hire a project leader and didn't know anything else, I would be looking at an N. If I was looking at an operational person, all things being equal, didn't know anything else, I would be looking at an S. just because they're going to get more intrinsic motivation from the task itself doesn't mean you can't switch them up. But just if you are, just be aware of that and make sure you throw some other projects in there, some other requirements in there, so the ends are getting a chance to conceptualize and look at the big picture. The next one I want to look at is what's often called coping with difficult people. And I'm going to go to some slides for that one. So we're going to go through it fairly quickly. I'll have you take some screenshots of slides. All right, so the setup for the next few slides, and again, I encourage you to take some screenshots, but I would like you to think about that person. So maybe in what we've already talked about, you've noticed that the source of friction may have been the caddy corner on the 4 styles. Or maybe what you've noticed is that some of that friction is that as you might be an N and you come in with the big picture first and wanting to talk about concepts, whereas they might be an S and they want the detail first. So that one is fairly easy. You want to make sure you have a mix of detail and big picture in general. But if you know you're talking to an S, you want to start with the detail. If you're an S talking to an N, you want to start with the big picture. You're going to have to do both, but it's what they want first to make sense of it. Sometimes you're presenting. If you're dealing with investors, you might be presenting and you notice people getting antsy and fidgety. They want you to move along. A lot of times it's a mismatch between the N and the S, so you can solve that. So now what we're going to do is take a look at the next, and in the next few slides, I want you to think about a person, that same person if we haven't resolved it already, or if we have, think about a different person that you may be experiencing some difficulty with, and there's some opportunities to make adjustments. And so the first slide here, so as I said, think about an important stakeholder where there's more friction in the relationship than you would like. Now approach it from the perspective that as the owner or leader, you're responsible for the environment, and the environment is you're creating that environment. Even though you may think of it as an interaction, you're also creating an environment. And some of the times the things I talk about is that the internal environment of the organization is the external environment of ourselves. And if you look at, I'm sorry, let me say that again. The internal environment of the organization is our external environment. And we adapt to our external environment the same way cells adapt to a human's internal environment. So our internal environment is the external environment of the cells, and they react to that. That's how you can get toxicity from bad mental habits and bad physical habits, et cetera, toxic environments. Get curious about what in the environment can be contributing to the friction. And that's how we're going to look at this. So these are the styles and types. Take a shot of that. The tank, and they're pretty descriptive. Aggressive, confrontational, causes people to avoid them. The sniper, they use sarcasm, passive aggressive. These are difficult because they undermine trust, and they kind of hit you with these tactics that is, if you respond, it sounds like you're being petty. But they're the ones who are actually creating the tension. Underhanded criticism, headshots, I used to call them. The grenade, they have emotional outbursts. Often they're unpredictable. Others, people start walking on eggshells. It's not helpful. The know-it-all, they always have to be right, and they dominate conversations. It could cause others to shut down. And what happens is you end up with groupthink and confirmation bias, and decisions are made that aren't the best thinking of the group. To think that they know it all people. These are similar to the above, but they're misinformed. I said these lead to the eye roll. And the thing is, with all of these, few people call them out. And there's a reason why, which I'll cover at the end of them. And then the yes person, they overcommit but struggle to follow through, and they can become the weak link. Then there's the no person. They shoot down ideas and they tend to be pessimistic. So the result is they get excluded from meetings. And then you have the nothing person, silent, non-responsive, maybe hard to engage, and then they create some discomfort. So the reason I said that these are usually conditioned behaviors. It worked for them when they were younger, and or in past life or past roles, and they tend to use it over again. And what happens is we tend to react. And the reason why it's so habitual is because for the difficult person, they've refined the behavior so that it works. They've refined the behavior based on the reactions that they've been getting. So they're used to the reactions. And this is why it's difficult if we react, because now we're falling right into that loop. So the solutions all come down to taking them out of that interaction and actually breaking the pattern, disrupting the pattern. Now, coping with difficult people, a leader's framework. You can change yourself. You can't change others. And even if you could, that's a non-starter. It's going to take you a lot more time to do that than to build the process and the environment. You shouldn't expect people to change for you. And I know especially for small business owners that has 5 to 10 people, it's very easy for them to fall into the trap of thinking that people have to adjust to them. It works with 5 or 10 people. It's not going to work when you have 50 people and you have them reporting to your leadership team. You're going to have to make these adjustments. Hope is not a strategy. Patterns repeat. You have to plan for that. Your job is to lead, not to fix. Gets back to not trying to change people, but to build the environment so that you can be productive. But more importantly, make sure you're hiring the kind of people that are going to work in your organization. Culture starts with you, and it has to do with who you hire and who you choose to keep. That's the other half of that. Included in development plan for your leadership system. So this is not just something that you and I we're in this conversation about. This is about having a development plan, which is why development plans are a big part of dynamic leadership, because you want to make sure that people have these skills. It's not that this is rocket science, but everybody's going to come to the table with their own version of this slide. And this is how you get people in from a family metaphor, military metaphor, populist, or command and control. And what you want is consistency. It doesn't mean that command and control doesn't work, but we want consistency. And that's part of the development plan. So you should expect that your leaders deal with difficult people in a very similar way based on proven principles. It doesn't have to be mine, but it should be something that's proven. And these all align with best practices when it comes to human interaction. But depending on the organization, if you run a very intense security operation, and you have some special ops people in there, obviously this list might be a little bit different. So there you go. You take a screenshot of that. I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but the behavior, the tank, they dominate conversations, they dismiss input, and then you can see the strategies. You have the sniper, they undermine things, and a lot of this comes out of insecurity. But again, I would say it's based on what has worked for people in the past, and that's why they repeat it. Definitely have to call them out. And I like to talk about leaders need elegant ways of calling people out, because if you don't call people out, it's going to continue. And then you're going to lead to a toxic environment. There have been numerous, you can just look around. There are teams that are underperforming because of one person. That one person is taken out and the whole team gets better. Attitudes get better. People enjoy work. The performance goes up because the tension is gone. And, they're creating some toxicity. And because everybody's reacting to reactions, they get into this loop. A big part of this is you have to come out of the reaction and get into the conscious mind. Then you have the grenade, the explosive reactor, unpredictable emotional outbursts, disrupts. The know-it-all we talked about, it dismisses other people's views. And a lot of this is self-explanatory. And then the think they know it all, misinformed, overconfident, etc. And then the yes person, overpromiser. And one of the challenges with yes people is that the leaders get off on bad paths, and it creates even more problems because nobody wants to challenge it. And now the leader's making bad decisions. They affect the whole team. It affects the entire organization just because the leader's, seeking out these yes people. If you're a leader who's seeking out yes people, you want to be aware of that and understand the pain that you're causing, and make sure you have someone around you who's going to tell you the real deal. And then you have the no person, which is the opposite. And sometimes it's a matter of who you choose to invite to meetings. It's okay to have the no people around, but you bring them in at times when you want somebody to be a critic and take a look at what could go wrong. You don't want to bring them in at the beginning when you're brainstorming. And then the nothing person, the silent observer. These are concerning sometimes because they can create this situation where people are uncertain. Unfamiliarity creates some tension, and people start thinking that they did something wrong, and they start questioning, and it just creates a snowball effect. So here's how we're going to deal with it. Engage the adult mind with direct, solution-focused language. These are some good disruptor questions. What outcome are you looking for? How do you see this resolving? What's the best next step? What's the next best step? Why it works? And what we're doing is, again, moving out of the reactive mode and into the conscious mind. Stay calm, acknowledge and move the conversation forward. Example acknowledgements. I see this is important to you. I get that this is frustrating. Let's find a way to move forward. So you get the idea. And then this was trace back the thought process. So rather than reacting to the conclusion, you want to trace back and find out how they arrived at that conclusion. This is like when we talk about changing beliefs. You don't want to attack the belief. You want to understand the references. People are willing to have a conversation about their references much more than they're willing to have a conversation about their beliefs or their conclusions. So that's it. So we talked about the 4 styles and how when we're catty corner, we talked about the 4 styles and how styles that are catty corner can have more friction than you would think. But even when you're across, there could be the problem of some friction just because one is leading with one dimension like direct or the other. And also, if you have 4 directors in a room, you want to cut the deck, right? You want to make sure that you're not getting into some group think. And then we looked at the Myers-Briggs, and the big picture people want to communicate big picture first and then details, but the S's, they want the detail first. So you want to manage that. And if you're having difficult situations with people or interactions, take a look at these. Take a look at these different dimensions and see if that's the cause of it. And then if not, you go back through the list, the tank, the sniper, etc., and see about that. But then work on coming up with elegant ways of diffusing things, because as a leader, as you grow and scale, you're just going to have more and more and more people. And the more people you have, the more of the fringes you're going to have as well. So you're going to have some elegant ways of getting things back on track rather than letting them escalate or fester, which is how we get toxic environments. And this is where you have leaders saying you can't control the culture. You can control the culture, but you do it like you would weed your garden or weed your lawn. You have to do it all the time and pay attention to it. All right, so that's it. Next week, we'll start talking about development plans and what goes into those. We'll see you.